Alright, hello everyone. We're a bit late because I forgot to set one or two things up, but we are on now. I hope everyone enjoys the new little overlay thing that I'm using. I'd love to put a animated GIF background behind the cat as well, but couldn't find one that I would be comfortable using for free, and yeah, sadness. But anyway, welcome back. I hope you've had a wonderful day out there, and we're going to start back with a little SCP Resurrection. This time we are going through the Prologue collection of Snakes and Ladders by Zin, followed by I Quit by Adam Bright, and finally A Restless Wanderer on the Earth by The Deadly Moose. But now we shall begin. A lot of people pass through Site-19. The most common movement is the rush from lab station to experimental room to cafeteria, back to lab station, with a few detours to the restrooms. Then, there are those who move from enlightened to exhausted. There are those who move from mundanity to madness. There are those who pass through sterile rooms and body bags and move no more. And then, there are the movements that are not through the holes, but through hierarchies. When researcher Zin Kiryu was first assigned to Site-19, her orientation included a tour of the biological anomaly containment cells and a quick meal in the ground floor cafeteria. She was then offered space in the on-site living quarters. She decided she could learn to ignore the pervasive emptiness of the halls and the faint mechanical buzzing present everywhere in the site. She'd get used to it, because in the midst of the lesser anomalies she'd been shown, she'd seen something that remained in her memory long after the voice of the guide had faded out. SCP-408 would soon need a new assignment of level 2 caretakers, watching its feeding schedule. The tour guide had recalled that Zin liked butterflies, and wouldn't it be nice if she were on the roster of 408 after she'd gotten settled in and was ready for it? Watching a cluster of the butterflies morph into a perfect replica of the silver pendant she wore, Zin told herself that one day, that level 2 would be her, and wondered what ready meant. A week later, Zin moved in. She brought the usual necessities and a few personal possessions to stave off the unfamiliarity. A spider plant in a pot decorated with painted butterflies, a gift from her old school friends, a teddy bear wearing a little lab coat, her spare poetry journal. Flushed with excitement of her first day as a live-in researcher, Zin immediately sought out the 408 roster and added her name to the list of hopefuls, hoping to work on the illusory butterflies. Later the same day, she received a very polite, professional email informing her that she'd been taken off the list because she lacked the requisite experience and please do not reapply this time. Zin blinked at the email, then closed it and shut down her Foundation-issued laptop. She picked up her lab coat teddy bear and put it on her head, concentrating on keeping it balanced. She then stared out her window, sulking for the next half an hour. Lack of experience. Do not reapply. Not good enough. The next day found Zin tearing through the living quarters in a mad dash because somehow she had lost 3 pairs of socks she must have misplaced during the move-in. Someone who was napping earlier had pity and pointed her towards the lost and found. Said lost and found was a large cardboard box sitting in the quarter's main common room. Zin approached the box with caution, noting the stained sleeve of a lab coat trailing over one side, and wondered if she should have brought protective gloves. She didn't find any socks, but halfway through the box, she unearthed a copy of Sun Tzu's Art of War, wrapped in a plain paper cover so as to seem utterly unremarkable. She opened to the first page, where 3 names were written neatly, next to dates. The most recent owner had purchased it second-hand nearly 30 years ago. After some hesitation, Zin took the book. Reading The Art of War gave her a strange comfort. She was new, unknown, effectively non-existent to everyone else on site, with only a bachelor's and a few years of graduate-level lab work. She knew she wouldn't be turning heads anytime soon. The book provided advice and guidance no one else would give. Think of the reasons not to trust you. Eliminate those reasons. She needed allies to stand a chance here. Allies, not minions. Because if you want someone just as good as... allies, not minions. Because you want someone just as good as you watching your back. Someone who will claw for recognition just like you. Plot and plan and covet just like you. Will consider your achievements a means towards their own ambitions. She made it this far relying on herself to keep promises, repay favors, gather friends. This was just a new piece of the sky to navigate, and a new network of clouds and stars to build. She drew a butterfly in her poetry notebook, labeled it 408, and added parentheses, someday. Two weeks in, Zin endured her first failed experiment. Glassware cracked, sampled rendered unusable, hours upon hours of careful work lost in one careless mistake. Her coworkers barely spared her a second glance, just shrugged it off and left her to mop up the sad remains of the biological anomaly slide. It wasn't that they disliked her, she decided as she tossed out the cleaning rag and her soiled gloves. They didn't even know enough about her to like or dislike. Only a few of her lab mates remembered her face, and even fewer bothered to learn her name. Why would someone be concerned about a nameless stranger's mistakes? When Zin slunk into her quarters later, she ignored her notebook and glared at the Sharks of the World calendar she'd affixed to the wall opposite her desk. Logic. She could drown out this bitter taste of not good enough with logic. Facts, hard truth. The short-fin mako shark is the fastest shark in existence, highly intelligent and capable of leaping 9 meters into the air. What is the worst thing that could have happened? The sample might have exploded, contaminating the entire lab and all the researchers present. What's the worst thing that could have happened? Everyone might have died. Did the worst thing happen? No. Not even close. Then you pick up the pieces and salvage something from this. Zin crumpled the tissue, swiped at her eyes, opened up the Foundation internal messaging system, and read through the newest memos without really reading them. She remembered the indifferent looks of the other researchers in the lab. Allies, she reminded herself. You need allies. She saw a memo sent out 2 days ago, mentioning 2 level 1 interns coming into the lab for the first time. No one else cares about these guys, she thought. They're distancing themselves in case the new meat makes mistakes. I can use this. I can't be the only newcomer to mess up. I can't be the only one to feel dejected, lonely, not good enough. I may be new and inexperienced, but I can still become a mentor, a colleague, a friend, someone to share stories with, someone to make this place less empty, less cold. Zin composed a message to the new initiates. The next afternoon found Zin sitting alone at a table in the site's second-floor cafeteria. In between bites of sandwich, she was composing a sonnet about the inevitability of failure when someone, one of her supervisor's colleagues apparently, sat down in the seat across from her. "I hear you're new to the labs," the guy said as he set down a lunch tray, opened a container of dressing, and proceeded to drown his salad in it. Zin blinked. Yes, she ventured. I am. Nice to meet you, Dr. The man told her his name, and a lot of things she hadn't even asked for. Department, clearance level, and half an hour of personal anecdotes. Zin hardly got a word in edgewise, but she listened to the man describe various insect toxins in his lab. Let's try that again. Zin hardly got in a word edgewise, but as she listened to the man describe the various insect toxins his lab encountered, she busied herself picking apart the monologue for cues. Shaking his head, eyebrows drawn, and gripping coffee cup tightly when talking about recent data. I should make a sympathetic sound and avoid introducing the topic. Posture relaxed, more gestures. Talking about some sort of experimental prototype. Make sure to bring it up if you ever see this guy again. When the man stood and thanked her politely for the discussion, Kiryu, he'd called her, not Zin, Zin scratched out the 2 rhyming lines she'd composed and scribbled down everything she remembered from the encounter. Eventually, the notebook came to hold more people than poetry. Every time Zin learned something about someone, she wrote it down. It was a way to remember faces, names, life stories when they next met, and they would come to remember her name, even if they only knew her as the person who remembered them. It took time, but it was an investment. Every person was someone to share lunch with, someone to swap gossip about, someone to vent to when lab work went awry. Moreover, they could also vouch for her, bring her closer to 408, give her an advantage over anyone else aiming to be 408's caretaker. Chance was something Zin never trusted. When it came to things she really wanted, she preferred to stack the deck in her favor. Somehow, Zin attracted the attention of a lab director. She was invited to research meetings. The supervisors discussed lab transfer. She did the paperwork herself. Show them your worth. Demonstrate responsibility and self-sufficiency. On her first day in the new lab, she entered the room ready to get to know the other lab technicians. Hopeful and wondering where the anomalous insect specimens were, but the lab technicians exchanged sheepish looks and mumbled something about miscommunication. They ushered her into the near-ancient lab archives, holding handwritten notes, case files, and other artifacts of research from decades ago. She was asked to retrieve a series of documents and maybe do something about the deplorable state of the stacks. Zin kept her expression carefully neutral, put away her lab gear, and got to work pulling charts. When the door closed and she was on her own, can't spare a second of their time for the new person? She sauntered over to a stray plastic cup sitting on a bookshelf, no doubt left by some slob who didn't pick up after themselves, scooped it up, and calmly crushed it in her fist. It wasn't anger, she told herself. She was just making the trash more space efficient. For the next few days, Zin reported directly to the archives and made herself comfortable there, shuffling between the rows of accumulated research. Dust and solitude made decent company for a strategy, she thought, while she tugged at a sheaf of diagnostic graphs jammed between 2 binders. The lab techs would be very much indebted to her when she fixed up the mess here, Zin told herself. Then she grit her teeth as a stray medical certificate grazed her hand, and she bandaged her 3rd paper cup that week. Since no one who visited these archives ever talked much, Zin had plenty of time to think about how to turn the situation in her favor. She would do her assigned task well, better than well. She had practiced searching the shelves until navigating the stacks felt so natural that others envied her skill. Then, she'd develop a system to make it easy for everyone else. There would be no more to gain keeping her here, and no choice but to move her on. It took a week. The lab techs blinked at how simple it was to find documents now that she'd arranged the previously outdated catalogs. They thanked her briefly and moved her onto the cold storage freezers. It was a step up, Zen told herself. She would handle the dead bugs first and push forward until they trusted her with the living. That night, she opened her book and turned to the page with the butterfly. She drew another butterfly below it and wrote the date and wrote one word. Soon. Let your rapidity be that of the wind, your silence that of the forest. Xin was mentally reciting passages from Sun Tzu the day she met someone she immediately admired. She had been rearranging preserved liver slices in the communal cold storage chambers. 7 years of backlog specimens since the last big sample transfer and consolidation. When someone called out her name. Kiryu, is that you? A man stepped between the stainless steel shelving units. He looked about her age, maybe a little older. It's good to meet you. Did you know people in the other biolabs call you the Freezer Fairy? She was getting a hell of a lot of mileage out of her practiced true neutral expression, but she was curious. I'm Zen. I don't know about the fairy part, though. Last I checked, no magic wand, no sparkles, no wings. She made a show of looking over her shoulder as if checking. The man smirked. Researcher Kiryu, the one who flirts between the shelves like a butterfly on the wind. He waved at a nearby shelf. Everything gets magically organized when you're around, though no one notices you actually moving things. Zin wondered if that comment was supposed to sound vaguely insulting. She also wondered why no one seemed to want to call her by her first name, but went with a smile anyway. Even if you disagree, don't challenge someone unless you need something from them. Guess that does sound like me. Stay focused on the immediate. Is there a specimen you're looking for? Yeah. Yeah, any chance you know where the 3-headed sulfuric acid-spitting centipede and its siblings are? The man shifted his gaze to a collection of microscope slides, and Zin got a better look at him. Tall, sturdy-looking shoulders, and a rather garish streak of blue. I'll have to ask him about that sometime. And, in his otherwise dark hair. Zin paused, racked her memory, and told him where he'd find the centipedes in about 5 seconds. The man seemed impressed. Pretty impressive, Kiryu. He grinned and scratched the collar of his shirt, the motion revealing a small dragon-like design embroidered on the sleeve of his lab coat. This guy does needlework? What will the lab techs do when you leave this place behind? When Zin offered the man a hesitant chuckle, maybe he'd like to get lunch sometime? He folded his arms, hiding the embroidery. Is he embarrassed by it? And shrugged. I'm joking. I'm joking. But there's been talk in labs about having you train some of the others. Your system works more than well enough to adopt. Higher-ups like your ideas. This person is privy to conversations I'm not supposed to hear, was what Zin heard. She nodded, and this time her smile was genuine. If the system works, I'd be happy to teach others to use it. Thanks for the heads up, Researcher Mercer. Riven Mercer. I work in the lab 2 doors down. That was a lab on 408's feeding rotation list. Nice to meet you, Researcher Mercer. Maybe we'll run into each other again sometime. We're definitely running into each other again sometime. Zin didn't write his name down. She would remember it without the notebook. 3 days later, Zin was given a team of bright-eyed, super-excited lab interns. Over the next few weeks, she taught them how to navigate the labyrinthian cold storage rooms, setting each intern in charge of sections of the organisms and organs locked in frozen sleep. She taught them how to talk to the supervisors, coax them to take pride in their responsibility, to be the experts that others would ask for help, to carve out their own prestige. The division of labor gave her time to return to the labs, handling samples instead of just putting them on the right shelves. It was still a far cry from working behind the locked doors marked SCP, but Zin still had her interns, her reputation as the freezer lady, and a notebook full of favors waiting to be called in. Would it be enough? She remembered Mercer's carefree smirk and the centipedes. The freezer team settled into a daily routine. Zin would meet with the interns twice a day, in the morning and evening. The time in between was spent patrolling the cold storage. Sometimes they'd all exchange terrible science puns they'd heard in grad school. The guy in charge of the human anatomy section always got the most groans. The day the shyest intern told her that he looked forward to the team lunches, Zin hummed upbeat pop tunes for the rest of the shift. Things were comfortable. Then, one day after lunch, Zin entered the cold storage room and heard Zin entered the cold storage vault and heard a scream. Following the noise, Zin rushed through the racks of stinging, piercing, biting specimens and stiffened when she saw one of the interns sprawled against a shelf, clutching an arm and breathing raggedly. On the ground, scuttling through shards of broken specimen case, was a vividly striped magenta scorpion. Cold storage suddenly seemed warm compared to the ice in her veins. Not on my watch, fucker. Zin grabbed the only thing she could reach, a stapler. Maneuvering herself towards the gasping intern, Zin clenched her hands until they were steadied. In a split second, she saw the pincers click and the stinger sway. Zin lashed out in sheer reflex. The toe of her right shoe met carapace, and the scorpion was flung against a steel cabinet. It fell and flopped onto its back, and Zin stomped on it, swiveling her foot as she crouched down to put her full weight onto the thing, once, twice, 3 times. Then she saw the still form twitch. She brought down the stapler's pointy edge in terrified reaction. The sound of her intern fighting for breath, drawing out the last noises made by the crawling menace as it went limp. Zin breathed out and collapsed against a wall, shaking. Scorpion guts smeared on her gloves. "That's why we wear closed-toed shoes in the lab," she said. She wouldn't remember much for the next hour. Her interns told her that she'd seemed catatonic as she simply transferred the scorpion's near dismembered remains into a reinforced plastic container, and the biohazard team arrived to clean up the mess. Zin later endured a long, demeaning lecture from her supervisor about the crucial specimen she'd destroyed, her carelessness when it came to emergencies, and her disregard for proper procedure. She should have let security handle it. She should have let security handle it. Left the intern to fend for herself. Untrained personnel shouldn't engage. Better to lose one than 2. The callousness of the higher-ups left Zin seething quietly for weeks. Apparently, the simple medical kit tucked away at the front entrance of cold storage was supposed to be more than sufficient. Besides, the interns had been trained in emergency procedures, a 2-hour seminar months ago, and a breach that threatened the life of only one person was a low-priority situation. That night, Zin tossed the Art of War back into the lost and found box. It was obvious that the freezer interns couldn't count on immediate backup for anything less than a dinosaur breaking out. Zin decided that her team would never again be left in the lurch with Zin decided that her team would never again be left in the lurch with only some bandages and disinfectant. She didn't want a medical kit in every section. She wanted a specialized chemical kit on every shelf, unique to the type of anomalies stored nearby, whether poisonous arthropod, noxious reptile, or rabid mammal. The specialized kits would take months to design, approve, and process, and even longer to put together. Zin knew that if she worked on the side project, she wouldn't be able to compete for the 408 slot. To hell with it, she thought. Her pitch was met with enough enthusiasm to get the interns kicked out of the cafeteria. The next day, Zin began drafting her proposal. The report was 20 pages long and cost her several nights of sleep. But when the first prototype, arthropod series Zin noted with a grin, was handed to her by an amused-looking Riven Mercer himself, she felt like she was finally getting somewhere. Within a year, the kits had been implemented in every lab on the site. By that time, Zin was transferred to Riven's lab to begin advanced lab experimentation. Unfortunately, Mercer had gone to work in anomalous object processing, promoted before I could catch up, and the 408 roster had been changed. Her new lab wasn't on the list. A few months passed by. The days turned into routine, an endless blur of tests, samples, and analysis. Researcher Kiryu, someone Zin didn't know, was standing behind her. Someone she was immediately suspicious of, since she was currently in the biological anomaly lab, holding a syringe filled with a caustic substance. And the man didn't seem to care about startling her. Yes, sir. Zin capped the syringe and placed it to the side. The motion had become familiar after months upon months of practice. Being interrupted in the middle of an experiment wasn't. I've seen your group's work. Your former interns are doing an excellent job. The man was hard to place. He was a doctor. That was all she could be certain of. She couldn't recall ever seeing him, meaning he had to fall on one of the extremes, newest of the new, or... Zin expressed a twitch. I'm glad to hear that the interns are doing well, sir, she ventured carefully. The man ignored her pleasantries. You're moving up to my lab. Check your memos. Move your belongings. Find someone to watch your ducklings. Oh, and bring protective gear. I'm going to dissect brains today. I expect you in place in 1 hour, freshly scrubbed. He didn't tell her that they would be dissecting the brains of deceased reality benders. He didn't tell her that they would be dissecting the brain of a deceased reality bender. When she exited the lab, hours later, visibly shaken, Zin remembered what she'd learned. Dr. Everett Mann was a no-nonsense man. He was meticulous in his procedures, terrifyingly adept with a scalpel, and her new supervisor. The next day saw her analyzing the brain slices under a microscope. Successive weeks led to the generation of pages upon pages of complex diagrams, sketches, and figures. With so much data came the possibility of manipulation, practical manipulation, Mann promised, and the engineering of new anomalies, nigh fully understood. Further time spent with Dr. Mann revealed an almost worrisome fascination with the esoteric structures of the once anomalous cadavers, verging on mania. Though some of his beliefs were rather unorthodox, he held to them fiercely, with a self-assuredness Zin envied. When Mann was in these excited phases, usually pacing around the lab coat splattered with evidence of successive dissection. When Mann was in these excited phases, usually pacing around in a lab coat splattered with evidence of successive dissections, Zin listened raptly to his theories and scribbled out pages and pages of notes. 6 months into her tutelage, Zin was granted her first pet project. Kiryu, I want you to take what you've learned and make something, Mann said. Give it a form and give it the will to obey. You will be assigned 10 lab assistants, and you have authority to make requests for materials, which will be approved or denied as I see fit. That night, Zin tore out the notebook page with the butterflies and taped it to the wall, next to the calendar. Without hesitation, she crossed out the 408. A few years passed. During this time, Zin ended up discussing her pet project with almost anyone she met. It started out as small talk when people asked her what she was up to in the labs, but the excitement in the replies came as a shock to her. People from all sorts of departments offered to help out, and to Zin's surprise, turned aside her insistence on repaying the debts. Raw materials? Level 2, full-time researcher, anatomy and physiology department. The guy who remembers the day of the week based on the color of pen in his lab coat pocket. Enthusiastic. My favorite intern from the old team.
Researcher Q. It's been forever. I got promoted just like you thought. Remember you called me the Viceroy of Viscera because I was in charge of the organs and storage? I missed you big time, yeah. You and your dumb bug jokes. Come on in. We just got a new bender brain.
A framework. Level 3, senior researcher. Biomed engineering department. The lady with the painted nails, easygoing. I like talking to her about the latest site news.
Oh hey, Ryu, good to see you again. You should come visit. I'm pretty sure there's a deceased 408 sample sitting around my lab somewhere. More than enough for a cell swatch. Thanks so much for teaching my BME techs your system, by the way. The archives and freezers haven't been so neat in decades.
Power. I need some way to keep this thing alive and living. Level 4 lab director jumps between 3 departments. The older lady, who likes the soft cloths used to clean eyeglasses. Stately. I looked up to her when I first met her.
The crystal will bend the light, see? You can work the wavelengths into whatever pattern you like. Test them out, Kiryu. That kid of yours saved 2 of my fingers last week.
Well, how to make this thing process, learn, adapt, and obey? Level 4, lab director, research and development. The guy whose projects are all ongoing and has yet to bear workable results. Who ended up using his own cells for his experiments. Meditative. He understood how it felt when everything was stagnating.
Here, my research notes, an old man's rambles. Make the most of them, Miss Kiryu, and thank you for listening.
Bit by bit, department by department, the pieces of the puzzle were mapped out, assembled, and put together. When Zin held her first complete, whole, unblemished magnum opus, a painted lady butterfly shimmering with wavelengths of light arranged in the patterns of a reality bender cortical columns and infused with her own cells, her own DNA. As she watched the luminescent wings open and close, as the butterfly regarded her face serenely. Faces and names passing through her mind as she remembered the collaboration that had brought her to this point. She felt worthwhile, meaningful, ready.
Hello,
she said. The butterfly tilted its antennae slowly, steadily, brought its front legs together, and with each contact tap, a syllable of sound.
Hello, Zen.
And that's the end of Snakes and Ladders. Next we have I Quit. You what? Seven stared, aghast. She was the first of them to speak, but not the only one. You can't do that, 8 blustered accusingly. He slammed his fist down on the table and then shook it, having hit harder than he had planned. This is a job for life. Tell them, 6. 6 steepled his fingers and studied 12 over them. For anyone who cared to look, there was a remarkable similarity between the two men. While 12 was clearly the elder of the two, 6 didn't look that far behind. The angle of their noses, the tilt of their head, even the shape of their face. They could have been brothers. One would expect 6 to even have the same bald spot that 12 proudly bore. If anyone could get 6 to take off that damned cowboy hat. I'm not so sure, 6 replied to the worked up 8. To be sure, it's never been done before. No, it's never been done before, 12 agreed. Since the council began, every overseer has left feet first. Shot, stabbed, blown up, turned inside out, reduced to a mimetic concept that can never die. He nodded slightly to 9, who nodded back in recognition, and variously reduced to their component atoms. But this whole thing with Site-19 had me thinking. I am an old man. If I die, I will die on my own terms, in my own bed, looking at a picture of my dear wife. He paused and glanced at his hands. 2 reached over and set her hand on top of his. It's okay, Adam. We all miss her.
I don't care for your excuses, 5 snapped. His fingers prodded the table like he was trying to point at a clause in a contract that didn't exist. The rules are very clear. Once you have taken the oath, once you have joined the council, you are in it for the long haul. If you wish to leave, then we will be glad to have someone remove you permanently.
5 missed the glance that was shared across the table at that. From 6 to 2 to 9 to 3. Clearly the glance said someone is overreacting. He wouldn't have cared if he'd noticed, of course. He was overreacting. He wouldn't have cared if he had noticed. Of course he was overreacting. Someone had to. Except I didn't take the oath, 12 replied very softly. I helped create the oath, but I never took it myself. The records will bear me out. 5 stared, open-mouthed. He slumped back in his chair and shook his head. 7 took up the slack and stood behind her. 7 took up the slack and stood from her seat. Be that as it may, you do not get to quit. As one of the remaining few founders, I'm not, 12 began. You were here when it all began, original council or not. You're the closest thing we have, and we need you here. We need the knowledge you hold. We cannot risk you being out on your own, where some other group might try and take you. Oh, don't worry, 12 interjected. I'm not stupid. I still have bodyguards. Like an ex-president, Like an ex-president, I'll still be protected. I've actually spent the last decade or so building myself a small town up in the mountains, where I raised my boys. He carefully did not look at 6. It's filled with retired agents, and not a few blissfully ignorant scientists. I'm being careful. I can't be anything but. He took a deep breath and let it out, eyes raised to find 6. I had children. I never saw them because of this job. Some of them grew up to be good people, not because of me. I have grandchildren. I've only seen through pictures. I want to reconnect with my grandchildren. I want to bounce a baby on my knee in my dotage. I want to be able to see the new millennium on my own terms, not... Tears welled in his eyes, and his voice caught in his throat. I want to be able to sleep, not thinking about whether the decisions I made that day... His voice trailed off, and he returned his gaze to his hands. A voice, normally silent, spoke.
It's simple enough. We vote. As is proper, yes?
The gathered council nodded silently at the one in charge.
All opposed to 12 retiring.
Hands went up. 7, 5, 8, 9, 4. 8 looked expectantly at the others. His glare intensified when they clearly did not move.
All in favor?
6 and 2 shot up like they were fired out of a cannon, both eager to support their friend? 9's hand raised at a more sedate pace. Eleven wobbled, then shook her head. She wouldn't support, but she wouldn't negate. 12 moved to raise his hand, but lowered it again at a glare from 1. Clearly, his own vote would not count. 3 shook his head in negation. He had no dog in this fight. 10 was clearly in deep thought, but her hand rose as well. To the shock of all, 1's hand rose. 5 to 5, 8 said. Ties go to opposing side. You stay. 12 sat there, his gaze locked at the table, as if all his broken dreams were laid open there. Until someone coughed behind him. 12 didn't move, just watched as the eyes around the table both lit up, and in the case of his supporters,
in the case of his supporters, and squinted almost shut in the case of its detractors. He didn't need to turn around to know who was there, with his hand raised. Adam, 12 no more, jumped from his chair. He spun around to grasp the hand of the tall, lanky man behind him and pumped it vigorously.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. 12 pried his hand away and held out a small box to the first ever retired overseer. I hope you don't mind, but I got you a watch.
And that is the end of I Quit. Hey, Enrico, how you doing out there? It has, in fact, been quite a while. Sorry if I'm not responding quite instantly. During the readings, I tend to read more and talk in between stuff. Okay, let's... Okay. I believe I had to do this last time. Here we go. A Restless Wonder on the Earth, which is from the Wonders Library collection. Now,
A possible memory.
a possible memory? Bluebird frowned at the oblong glass shard in the merchant's hand.
Why would I pay for such a possible... Why would I pay so much for a possible memory?
The merchant smiled a little instead of replying. Bluebird found this merchant was always a little exasperating. She always had this smug, detached attitude, but she still managed to be adorable. As adorable as one of Dark's people could ever be, anyway.
2 reasons, the merchant said. 1, the age. You will find that the age of this possible memory is uncountable eons. I'm not convinced, Bluebird said. I've paid for many an ancient memory that contained nothing but unsurpassed dullness, and this is a possible memory, so it may be altered in any number of irritating ways. The second reason, the merchant smiled, the one from whom this possible memory was acquired.
Bluebird folded their arms to emphasize their skepticism.
Who?
The merchant opened a small lamp and focused it until it emitted a single ray of light, especially bright in the dim fog of the shadow market. She rubbed the shard and held it up to the ray of light.
Look and see.
Bluebird leaned over to look. His eyes widened as he saw the images dancing through the murky glass.
Yes, Bluebird said. I will pay for this. I will pay whatever you ask for this.
Then, the man found Cain Ben Adam in the endless wilderness of the Between Places. The man was beautiful to look upon, with bronzed skin and shaggy black hair. His clothing was cut of animal skin, of fashions pleasing to the eye. But Cain was not pleased to see him. The man knew his name.
I am a priest,
the man said.
A year ago, you passed through my village. I wished to follow you then, but I was held back by the others. Then the crop failed, and a plague swept through our village. I was able to save myself, and then there were none to hold me back. I have searched for you since. Now I have finally found you.
Cain frowned. He tried to wander only those lands where the soil was wild and suffused with power. He had tried to wander only those lands where the soil was wild and suffused with enough power to resist his curse. Or else lands where the inhabitants knew how to refresh the lands which his curse had made barren. When he needed to pass through civilization, he avoided the fields. He had long ago discovered that his curse had a limit, 48 cubits around him, or length similar to 12 times his own height, enough to judge with the naked eye. But that did not account for the times where he was not fully aware.
not fully awake. He would walk in a trance according to where his feet took him alone. After these periods, he could wake having destroyed the entire harvest for a village.
I am truly sorry,
Cain said. The man looked astonished.
You are Cain, the Wanderer, father of the lost children and great beasts. You are the god of death. The other gods, the lesser gods, could not save my village. I worshipped them once, I despise them now. I have come to worship you.
They were your family, Cain said. Even if they were not, I cannot be pleased about bringing death to those who did not deserve it.
You are testing me, my lord. The man's teeth gleamed. I promise you, I will not disappoint you. I will become your follower and your priest.
Foolish, Cain said, and continued walking. The man followed him. In the beginning. For long after the branding, Cain told himself that that nothing had changed. His curse would not matter. He would make it not matter. He swallowed his sorrow and guilt and resolved to carry on. He went to the land of Nod, the Wandering Land. There his curse could not touch the land, for it was too wild to even support crops, and the life there too resilient and alien. Dwelling there seemed to calm the wanderlust that had suffused him since the branding. He would build a life in Nod, he determined, a settled, stable life, and it would be as if nothing happened. And Cain found, to his surprise, that he did not age. His mental parts did not rust nor decay. His skin did not wrinkle. His hair did not turn gray. His memory, though hazy when it came to his childhood and the time before the branding, now never faded in clarity. The only sign of his aging was when his brown eyes faded and shifted to become a bright blue. He was invulnerable to the ravages of time, as he was to the weapons of man. Truly, his curse was no curse at all. Then, the man followed Cain through the wilderness, sustaining himself with the priest's hearts. But emotionally, he began to come undone.
They deserve to die, all of them, he said. Inanna was a whore. Aya was false. Belshunu beat me with a stick when I was young, and all of them refused to let me choose my own path. Chains of words, but chains nonetheless. We need you, they said. They needed to use me. Let them rot in their graves.
Cain never answered.
Why do you remain silent? The man asked, his face flushed with anger.
I have said all there is to say, Cain said, and you should not speak ill of the dead.
Perhaps you are right, the man said. Perhaps they did not deserve to die. Perhaps you are no god at all.
Cain was silent, watching him clench and unclench his fists. The sun beat down overhead.
If you are not a god, you are a demon, and you deserve to die.
He hefted his stout metal walking stick.
We will see if the stories are true. Or perhaps I will put an end to you now.
Cain stood still as the man came at him. He took the blow from the stick and felt the pain, but, as always, was unmoved. His assailant toppled backwards and sat on the ground, stunned. Cain looked at the man as he sat on the ground, looking up at him, gawking. Fortunately, the blow had not been well struck. The man would only suffer aches and bruises, not broken bones. I am not a god, Cain said. Perhaps I am a demon, but nonetheless, I cannot fall by your hand. He returned to walking. After some time, the man got up and followed him. In the beginning.
In the land of Nod, the more Cain settled, the more the mark on his forehead stirred. The wandering urge grew stronger in his breast, but he ignored it. Instead, he erected more cities. The cities grew and prospered. His curse could not extend through the ways that filled Nod. Therefore, he built his cities around the next side of ways. Those who lived in his cities traveled through these ways to find or to tend fields in summer proper, and in other lands just as fertile. Still, the urge to wander increased, and the nightmares came too. Sometimes every night for months. He would wake up sobbing, incoherent, inconsolable. He remembered every variation of his sin that he had ever performed, past, present, and future. He remembered every possible color of his brother's blood.
"What have you done to me?"
The corpse of his brother would ask.
"What have you done?"
He would be like this forever, he realized, forever living with the sorrow and regret. Cain became filled with a fury unquenchable. He raged against the heavens.
"This is your fault. Yours."
Nod was filled with abandoned works from the dead Ancient Ones, weapons with which Cain, friend of the Ancient Ones, was more than familiar with. He built off these to create new weapons of war for humanity. He could not fully reanimate their works, but he created new ways of working metal to compensate. With the treasures he received in exchange for these weapons, he built more cities, larger cities, and once he had enough large cities, he began to raise armies. He led these armies in wars. He stood against monstrous armies and laughed at their weapons destroyed by their wielders. He led these armies into wars. He stood against monstrous armies and laughed at their weapons, destroyed their wielders as they battered his body. Whole civilizations fell before him. After, he used his curse to defile their lands. Yet he was still filled with misery. The more death he was responsible for, the more his misery grew, buttressed by the eternally perfect memory of everything he had done. Then, still, the man followed Cain. Both his worshipfulness and his rage were past. "I admit it," the man said.
I admit it, the man said. I loved them. I did weep for their passing. I only tried to hide it because I wished to please you.
Cain was silent.
You have powers beyond those of any mortal, the man said. You can bring them back, all of them. It can return to the way it was.
"I cannot reverse death," Cain said. "My curse does not grant me such a boon. Would that it did."
Surely you can. Surely you are testing me. What must I do to earn this favor?
"I cannot bring them back," Cain said.
It must be a small thing for one such as you, the man said. Please.
"I cannot bring anyone back."
I will travel the lands and bring you riches. My healer's powers can bring me much treasure in a great city. I can work and bring it all to you. I can be your manservant. No, your willing slave to do with as you will. I can be your emissary, your herald, your priest. I will do anything.
"There is nothing that you or I can do."
Please.
Cain was silent. In the beginning, Cain resolved to cease the shedding of blood. He could not infuriate the heavens this way, only disappoint them. But perhaps he could please the heavens instead. Perhaps then his curse would become more bearable. He would become a patriarch like his father. He would do his father better. He would become what Abel could have been. He would build cities which would last for all time. To be a patriarch, he would need family. Not a family like the children born of the blood he had spilled, nor the lost children who came after. No. He needed a family that would be acknowledged by those who hated him. Nor could he begin a family with the men he loved. No, they would not do. He considered, briefly, the men who could bear him children. The one thought women by the traditional patriarchs like his father. No, they would not do either. His father would see them as women, who thought themselves as men, and would pass judgment harshly. No, he would need an ordinary woman, one who was seen as a woman by all the people of the land, and a fertile woman who could bear children. Then, likely other wives as well, of the same fashion. The ease at which this was accomplished was surprising. Within only a few years, Cain had a wife and a son named Enoch. He named a city after this son. His son had children, their children had children. Cain's cities grew. The wandering urge grew stronger. He began to suffer from tremors, shaking upon the earth, sometimes for days at a time. He began to sleepwalk, wandering far outside the city or his cities before waking in the light. He began to sleepwalk, wandering far outside his cities before waking in the dawn light and returning. Then, the band still followed Cain. They trudged through snow and sleet in the in-between lands. The man was silent now, only breaking silence only with the occasional choked sobs. He had long since ceased to eat and drink. He used the healer's arts to maintain, he long ceased to eat and drink, using his healer arts to mindlessly sustain himself. He hardly lifted his head, only putting one foot in front of the other in Cain's footsteps. They reached the cold shoals of the eternal sea. The sea cold never. Cain began work on building a boat. The man could not help build the boat, but Cain did not want his help. The techniques to create and forge this sort of metal boat were totally alien to this man. Cain had a long experience with them. He had spent much time on the seas, where his curse had little effect. When the boat was finished, the man boarded the boat with him. Cain did not object, only handed him an oar. They floated forth on the wintry seas. The man muttered words between frozen tears.
I should have been a better son, a better husband, a better healer, a better human being.
Cain was silent.
I did it. I killed them. By abandoning them, I killed them as surely as if I had done it with my own two hands. I was the healer. They relied on me. I could have saved them, or at least some of them, but I left. If only I had stayed.
They were on the sea for a long time. In the beginning, to stop his incessant wanderings, Cain had himself chained up in Enoch's palace. The wandering urge lessened and slowed, but became ever-present, a steady, horrible beat under his heart. His children and grandchildren tried to please him in his prison, but Cain found himself unable to feel almost anything. His days passed in an empty stupor, with neither pleasure or pain, beyond the ache in his forehead and in his chest. The land of Nod shifted and changed. First one of Cain's cities were destroyed, then another. Cain found himself feeling that this, too, was a punishment from the Elohim. But he could hardly feel enough to care. Then the end came for the city of Enoch, too. Cain was still in chains under the palace when it collapsed on his head. He felt the pain, but he did not die. Instead, he lived, trapped immobile, deep in the rubble of the ancient city. Perhaps he thought he would be here forever. Perhaps this was his final punishment. Then, when they reached the terrestrial plains again, and the boat ran aground on the new shore, the man looked up for the first time in a long while. The sun was rising. They watched it together. There was a city on the horizon, suffused with golden light. "This is where we part ways," Cain said. "I will not go to the Sun City today, but you should."
What will I do?
The man asked.
You have mourned your family, Cain said. Lay them to rest. Build shrines in their honor, and find another people. Heal others as you did not heal your village. In this way, you can begin to atone.
I will,
the man said. The man walked towards the city. Cain watched him until his form dwindled away. In the beginning, Cain's children came to him under the earth. They whispered things to him, secrets, prophecies. For a long time, he ignored them. And then he began to listen. After some time, his children came, silently, to unearth and free him. A great many of the lost children came, even the first, the High Golem. As he picked his way through the rubble of his former life, he found that his human family was long dead. His cities were gone, only ruins left, swallowed by the lush and roiling wilderness of the wandering land of Nod. The lost children told Cain the paths he needed to follow. He listened. He would accept his curse. He would wander the world until he found all the possible ways to atone for his sins. If peace for him was still possible, then this was how he would find peace. Cain followed the paths, embracing the wanderlust and stepping into the wider world. Now, Bluebird left the shadow market, their eyes wide and head held high, the possible memory in glass tucked in their coat. Ze opened a way to another world and stepped through. And that is the end of A Restless Wanderer on the Earth. Again, that was Snakes and Ladders for the first story by Zinn, I Quit by Adam Bright for the second, and A Restless Wanderer on the Earth by The Deadly Moose for the third. Honestly, really enjoyed reading through these stories. I may or may not have to read it twice because the original recording was so corrupt that I couldn't understand a word I said, but there we go. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. I'd love to hear feedback on the whole display stuff, and if you liked, I hope you'll leave a like. If you want to hear more, leave a subscribe. Next time, we'll be coming back with Prologues of the Serpent's Hand, Prisoners, Family, Showtime, and Sisters, all by the Deadly Moose. But, again, it's been a wonderful time reading for you all, and I hope to see you all again. Thank you for coming, and goodbye.